It's that time again where we talk to national podcaster and journalist Grant Hermes of the Make It Make Sense with Grant Hermes podcast. Welcome, Grant.
Hey, Ryan, how are you?
I'm doing good. Before we get going, I'm just going to remind folks that this is the Oklahoma Memo Podcast. I got a daily local news recap. It's basically a newsletter. I send you headlines from vetted newsrooms across the state. You can sign up for that at oklahomamemo.com/subscribe. So we got a couple of topics this week, and one of them is sort of timely to today because I understand there are going to be some discussions on ACA, Obamacare, healthcare, subsidies. I don't know if you saw this, Grant, there was a story referring to an Oklahoma Policy Institute report noting that if Congress allowed these healthcare subsidies to expire, there would be big impact in Oklahoma, but it's not on who you think. It's going to be on rural Oklahomans, the folks who supported Trump the most to begin with. So let's just start at the beginning and make it make sense. What's happening right now with healthcare?
Sure. We can start with that Oklahoma Policy Institute study because that's something that we have talked about before on here, that I've talked quite a bit about on Make It Make Sense. The reason that it's going to impact those folks most likely the most is because what we were talking about, especially during the shutdown, in that Democrats wanted an extension to these ACA, these Affordable Care Act or Obamacare subsidies that help prop up a lot of plans. And the way that works is that the government sends that money to Americans who are on the ACA. They can file for it at the end of the year in their taxes to get a lump sum, or they can choose to get it doled out quarterly or monthly, depending on the kind of plan that you have. And that's important to remember for a thing that I'm going to say a little later. But those subsidies really go to help prop up rural hospitals, because a lot of people who need ACA coverage live in rural parts of America. They tend to be much poorer than the average American, and those rural hospitals are their only doctors in their area, sometimes for tens of miles, sometimes more than 100 miles. And so the reason that it's going to hit those folks the hardest is because it's going to hit their hospitals the hardest. And that's the problem with a lot of this. And then you get the knock-on effect of people not having a hospital and then deciding that they're not going to have insurance in general, or look for a cheaper, maybe more expensive out-of-pocket plan that covers less because their premiums are going to go up if these subsidies and these extensions, or these subsidies extensions, don't get extended. And there was just a Kaiser Family Foundation study that came out a little while ago that sort of goes right alongside this Oklahoma Policy Institute study that said that 1 in 3 current people on the ACA are going to search for a lower plan, a lower cost plan that will lower their coverage, but be more expensive in the long run. And 1 in 4 said that they might just go without health insurance. And now there's some overlap there, so it's not exactly 55% of people, are saying that they're not going to have the health insurance they have now, but we could be looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 50% of the people that are on this health insurance right now aren't going to have the same coverage come January 5th that they have now. And what's happening right now in Congress is 2 things. Today, so just after we're talking here, because we're talking in the morning, the Senate is going to vote on 2 separate health bills. Both of them are expected to fail. They are separate plans that have been put up by senators. Both of them deal with having health savings accounts. HSAs is what you'll call them. People are pretty familiar with them now, but basically it's a way to take some of your insurance money, put it into basically a bank account that you can then pay for certain medical costs. You can't always pay a premium with your HSA. You can't always pay even your deductible with your HSA. It depends on your plan. It depends on how these things work. The way that those plans are being described is that it's giving the money to the people instead of the insurance companies. That's what the president is saying. That's what the more popular plan is. Senator Bill Cassidy's plan from Louisiana. He's a doctor himself and came up with this plan. The other one is by Rick Scott, the senator from Florida, who ran an insurance company and that was fined more than $1 billion for stealing from that company, basically. So I don't know if that's the plan you want to go with, if that's your guy. But Bill Cassidy's plan is the more popular one. And it's a mischaracterization of how the ACA works to say that the money goes directly to the insurance companies. It does not do that. It goes to the person paying the insurance company, the consumer themselves first. And then there are sort of some parameters that insurance companies have to fit inside that are expensive. There is no doubt about it that ACA coverage is expensive. A lot of that has to do with the way the law was written to kind of neuter it in a way, so that insurance companies could force the government to pay certain premiums and force them to pay certain amounts that, or allow them to charge certain amounts that then raise costs. Uh, there's a fix to that in some sense of a repeal and replace plan or altering plan that could change that. There's just no willingness to do that. Part of that is a lot of Republicans just don't believe in the mission of the ACA and Obamacare. They don't like it as an idea. They don't like the government being involved in this kind of private business. And part of it is political because it's Obama's signature plan, and he was the most popular president in the last 30 years. And they don't want that to be a lasting legacy for him. Um, in the House, so after the Senate votes on these things, that's a different thing. In the House, there was no guarantee after the government shutdown, after the Republicans said, we're going to let you have a vote in the Senate on extending the ACA subsidies to reopen the government so that Democrats agreed to that thing. There was no guarantee that the House was ever going to vote on that, which is why people criticized Democrats in part for seeming like they were caving in this thing. Members of the House on the Republican side are pretty upset with Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, for not having any kind of answer for health care. But knowing that premiums for pretty much everybody who's got health insurance are going to increase come January 1. People on the Affordable Care Act are going to see their prices double, if not triple or quadruple, depending on where you live and what your plan is. People who don't have ACA coverage or on private plans, you're going to see your costs go up. It could be as little as 1%. You might not notice it, but it could be as much as 50%. And you would definitely know that. So the Republicans now, a handful of them, have signed another discharge petition, which is like the Epstein files, the thing they had to sign to go around the powers that be of the Speaker of the House. They've signed this now with Democrats in order to force a vote on extending the Affordable Care subsidies for the next 2 years, which will give them a timeline-ish, vaguely, to come up with a different plan. Those things are happening simultaneously. There is no guarantee that vote's actually going to happen given the timeline of between now and the next 8 days when the House and Congress, leaves for the holidays and adjourns and then comes back for a new session. But it is really striking to see, one, that this vote is happening in the House, or this discharge petition is making the rounds in the House. Again, going around Mike Johnson. And two, that it's been 10 years since the attempt to repeal Obamacare was thwarted by the late Senator John McCain. And there is still no Affordable Care Act alternative from the Republican Party. That kind of has to be said here in this conversation, that the HSAs are not exactly a replacement for that. It's not going to cover everybody, and it's not going to do the same thing. And they just don't have a plan. And I don't know what happens next with that. But if they don't do something, a lot of people are going to lose health care and are going to lose access to their doctors and are going to lose health insurance. And a lot of them just are going to go without it, which is bad for all of us.
Just give you a real world example so folks don't think that we're just fear mongering.
Yeah.
Let's talk about rural hospitals in
Yeah.
Oklahoma. The Stillwell Hospital in far northeastern Oklahoma shuttered. I remember there were issues down in southeastern Oklahoma, McCurtain. So what happens when your rural hospital gets closed is that if you actually need hospital services, you drive into Tulsa, you drive into Oklahoma City or Ada or Muskogee or someplace that's a little bit bigger, which costs you more money, takes more time, and in some cases, I mean, that time, that's your health right there. So that's the impact. It's not necessarily only the number on a bill or what's coming out of your pocketbook. It's the other costs that are happening there. The fact that you don't have access to this care in your local community. That's why they were so important.
Right. And two things to note, too, is that most often what gets cut first from a rural hospital is your maternity wards, your OBGYNs, your delivery rooms for babies, and mothers who birth, even in 2025, is still complicated. And Oklahoma's maternal mortality rate, the rate at which mothers die during childbirth, is not by any means the lowest in the country. I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's not great. And if your OB department, your delivery room, uh, closes in your nearest rural hospital, and you know you or your wife or your daughter or whoever goes into labor, and it's a difficult birth, and you can't get to a hospital in time that can help them, there's a real risk that they're not going to survive. In 2025, that's still a thing that has to happen in this country. And that's a real thing that we're facing here. The other thing that happens is if your rural hospital closes, um, and you cannot get to a major city like Oklahoma City or Tulsa, generally speaking, in most states, and Oklahoma is very much included in this, your next closest rural hospital will also likely close because they cannot handle the load of people coming in. And on top of that, prices for everybody go up because people tend to have to go to emergency rooms at these hospitals, like in Oklahoma City or Tulsa. If you live, you know, I'm in Stillwell, right? Uh, because their insurance doesn't cover a hospital that is then out of network, even though a hospital doesn't exist in network for them anymore. So that means that the rest of our prices have to go up too, because we, in the end, also pay a cost for emergency room visits. So it, there is sort of this like ripple effect that happens from this when the status quo, no one's really thrilled with, but also is sort of keeping some of the worst of this at bay, politically and financially speaking.
Is Congress just delaying ultimately what needs to happen in terms of the Bernie Sanders vision for this? I mean, could there be a silver lining in that this just pushes us closer to single payer?
I, I mean, maybe. I think single payer is still a really hard sell for most Americans. Um, it feels like socialist medicine to a lot of people. I mean, it is socialized medicine, and what never works, because Democrats have been trying it for decades, is to point to Europe and other Western countries that are our economic allies and on our same tier, right? What we used to call first world countries. Almost all of them have some form of socialized medicine. I mean, you could look to Canada, uh, and look at that. And people say that there are problems with delays in those healthcares, and there are problems with the ways that those systems work, and there definitely are. Um, but that is just not a compelling argument, and that's kind of what Sanders and other Democrats are pushing for. I also think that there's a pretty big insurance company lobby that has a lot of money to throw around, and so a single payer system, or universal health care is a tough sell because there's a lot of money to go up against too. Um, I I don't think that that's what Republicans are waiting for. I don't think they're waiting for sort of the Democrats to come up with an actual plan to implement a radical solution to a radical problem. I think they just don't have a plan, and they want to be seen fighting the Affordable Care Act, but they don't really want to get rid of it altogether. It reminds me a lot of the fight around abortion up until, you know, 3 years ago, where abortion was a really good issue for Republicans because every single time it got to get brought up, or it got brought up, they got to hit Democrats with a big old stick, get a bunch of votes, get a bunch of money, and then never actually have to worry about it being repealed. And it was a perfect issue for that. They always won on it, and there was no downside for them. And the ACA is also kind of like that. And we're getting a little bit right now in this current moment of them again being the dogs that caught the car and not having any thumbs to drive with. And we'll see what happens with this, because if they're going to put their money where their mouth is, they're going to have a plan. And we just don't have one right now.
I never really thought that the Republicans would ever be sitting around waiting for like more of a socialized solution. I thought maybe that the Democrats were sort of like stepping back. If this were a tennis match, oh, you want to make unforced errors, we know where this eventually might lead. Now, it's not every Democrat by any means, but the reality is that if these subsidies expire and more rural hospitals close and people have less access to health care and costs go up, well, that's going to impact the ballot box next November.
Yeah.
And then if you start to get more Democrats in there, You want an alternative to this solution, you might just get it and you might not like it.
Right, exactly. And that is sort of the like other side of what happened in the government shutdown, where people criticize Chuck Schumer for cutting this deal with John Thune, the Republican leader of the Senate. But it also like, I, there's this idea that maybe Schumer is playing the long game on some of this and knew that there was never going to be an actual vote on anything with healthcare. And in a moment in which we are talking a lot about affordability, and that is going to be the issue for 2026, barring something else major happening, some crisis, something. There's a lot of time between now and elections next year. But for most people, the affordability issue is going to be the number one issue, and healthcare is on the top of that list. And Republicans not having a plan, but then also blocking a continuation of the status quo, the current moment, is going to put them in like prime target position for Democrats to be like, look, we had something like affordability, and then they tanked it. They sunk your battleship on this thing. And politically, I don't know. And it could just be that Democrats are hanging back on that baseline of that tennis match and are waiting for unforced error after unforced error enough to then really take a swing at something like single payer. That's possible. I don't know if that's something that they'll actually do. There are a lot of Democrats who aren't in favor of that system as a whole. But that's also a little ways out. I think right now they're just Democrats. They are just trying to figure out what Republicans are going to do next, because Republicans don't seem to know what they're going to do next. And everyone's sort of in this wait and watch moment.
You would think that the insurance lobby and the Republicans together would collude, and I use that term not pejoratively,
Mhm.
that they would get together and sort of work on something together so that they both could be victorious.
Yeah, it you would think so. Um, but the way the president has been talking about insurance companies lately, in a sort of populist swing, is it's tough if you're a member of Congress to be seen with an insurance company lobbyist right now. The president has vilified these companies quite a bit. Whether they care about that so much, I'm not really sure. They play both sides of the field when it comes to who they fund and which PACs they support. They did put more money into Republican political action committees during 2024 and back the president. But, you know, they might just be kind of sitting around and know that there are certain members of Congress who know where their bread is buttered. And that's from the insurance lobby in this way. So, yeah, I'm sure those conversations are happening. I'm sure that there are, wink and nod promises being made. That's how these things work. It's gross but it's how politics works. Uh, no one likes it, but it is. Uh, I think that some of this gets a little more dire in the new year when this conversation is going to have to be had in earnest. People's prices are going to go up. People are going to skip hospital visits. You're going to start getting stories about hospitals closing or having to turn away somebody because they can't treat them and that person's going to die in a parking lot somewhere. Those stories are going to happen. Or someone's going to have not made it to the next nearest hospital because the ACA extensions expired and their hospital had to close. Those stories are going to happen, and that's going to put a lot of pressure on not just Republicans because they're in power, they'll feel more of it, but on every member of Congress and in the Senate, because this is their job to get this done. And to not get it done is and should be frustrating for a lot of people.
It would be one thing if something like that were to happen to a guy like me, but let this start happening to expectant mothers,
Mhm.
and just it's a big problem. It's a big problem in the real world, but it's also, I mean, you talk about a potential for a catalyst for change, and let's
Yeah.
let's talk about change for a second. 26, we got a big election next year.
Mhm.
When we talk at this time next year, we could be talking about a whole new Congress. Who knows what's going to be going on in the executive branch?
Right.
Typically, there are transitions that happen in a presidency, often after 2 years, but I've heard from you in the Make It Make Sense with Grant Hermes podcast that there might be some changes to be had in the Trump administration after 1 year. What are you hearing?
So what I'm hearing here is that, and this is based on some reporting and some people that I'm talking to, is that there are a few names that the president has been asking people about, sort of fishing for an answer, almost looking for permission in a certain way to maybe ask for the resignations of some members of his cabinet. And those include some fairly big names. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General. It includes Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense. And it includes Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, along with the FBI Director Kash Patel. Kristi Noem, as we're talking, is just starting her Capitol Hill grilling session today, basically. Like, she was brought in front to testify about what's been happening in her department, both money-wise and then also about specific terror threats, because she is in charge of that. It's her first big one on Capitol Hill, so it'll be interesting to see how she responds to some of this. This isn't where she's good. She wasn't great in her confirmation hearing. She wasn't good in these things as a member of Congress, so we'll see. But those names are on a chopping block after year one. And it's important to remember, too, that in the first 100 days or so, and in the first 200 days, the White House had a really strong internal line about no scalps. No one gets fired, no high-profile firings or reshufflings in the first 100 days and the first 200 days, because it's a bad look. It made it look like the White House couldn't handle its really big pushes, which they have been going at a breakneck pace. And aside from what you think about the policies and what actually is happening, it would be an absolutely insane pace for any incoming administration, regardless of the fact that Trump has been president before or not. The pace at which this White House has been moving is almost unprecedented. It drains people. So after a year like this, it's not that uncommon to see some members leave. The interesting thing, too, and we said this kind of before we started rolling, is that the people that we're talking about Trump is letting go, or wants to let go, or is talking about letting go, are not exactly people you would bring in to lay a solid foundation of this stuff. They're sort of the people you bring in when the foundation has been laid, and then they're the people who keep it on the rails and perform a lot of this. It's just as important to Donald Trump that someone like Kristi Noem or Pete Hegseth or Kash Patel perform their jobs and look good on camera doing it, and look good on Fox News and interviews doing it, as much as it matters to him that they do the job well. In fact, it might matter a little bit more to him that they look good doing it than how well they're actually doing it. But Pete Hegseth, as we talked about before, and I talked about kind of all week last week, has become a real liability for this president. He is pretty scandal-prone. He is not answering questions about some of this stuff. Trump, when asked about Pete Hegseth on Monday by Politico, and the video of these strikes in the Caribbean, sort of was nonplussed by it, was sort of, not apoplectic, but apathetic. And it's this thing that he does when you can tell his mind's made up. Yeah, he's sort of like, wow, I don't care what he does. I'm not involved in those decisions. So all of a sudden the president is eschewing blame on somebody below him. And also is saying that he's not involved in decisions about military operations more or less off the coast of Florida. Like, if I'm Pete Hegseth, that's not great for me. Kristi Noem has become sort of a liability because there are lots of questions about the way she's been spending money from the Department of Homeland Security. She bought 2 private planes with Coast Guard money earlier this year to a tune of about $100 million per plane. She just bought a fleet of 6 Boeing 747s to be private deportation planes, so the government doesn't have to keep chartering planes to deport people to wherever they're going. The reason that matters is because if they charter a plane, that's something that you are allowed to Freedom of Information Act request logs for. If it is a government plane, they could say that it's part of national security and you just could not get that. And so then we would have no way of knowing when planes took off, where they're going, who's on them. So there's all that. She spent $200 million plus on an ad campaign about border security and DHS, much of that thanking Trump personally. A lot of that money got funneled to a strategy firm that her alleged boyfriend works for or has worked for, and the CEO of that company is the husband of a press secretary. And so there's a lot of that happening with her, on top of the fact that a lot of the immigration enforcement stuff is not holding up in court very well. and DHS has been seen lying to judges. Same thing with the Department of Justice under Pam Bondi and Kash Patel. Patel is his own things. He's bungled several investigations, including in Tyler Robinson, the accused shooter of Charlie Kirk, and the way that he handled that by saying that they had the shooter first and then they didn't. There's new reporting out from a new Senate filing that said that Kash Patel impeded the investigation that day, the manhunt for that alleged shooter, because he refused to get off his private jet because he didn't have an FBI windbreaker and sent FBI agents scrambling to go find one for him. Ended up wearing, like, it was his whole thing, wearing like a women's jacket. Like, that doesn't really matter, but like, it was the fact that he delayed this thing. And then when he got made fun of for, he said he was actually looking for a youth large or whatever because he's not a very big guy. And like, I don't know what the FBI director is doing, trying to clap back at people on Twitter. Like, that's not what they do. So there's that. And then Pam Bondi, her big fault here is that she told Trump he's all over the Epstein files. It was news he didn't want to hear. And she, in February, she said, I have the list on my desk for review. That set off a timeline that Trump did not want ticking behind him. And so the whole Epstein saga and the fact that those files are going to get released next week on the 19th are really because Pam Bondi said we have them. And he's upset with them. And then on top of it, the DOJ is losing quite a bit in court when it comes to the things that Trump really wants. So those are big names to potentially be gone early next year, early into this administration. And there kind of is nobody to replace them. It's interesting to think about a world in which you've got, somebody brought in to be several jobs at the same time. I mean, you could see a version in which, because you could serve as multiple cabinet secretaries. That's up to the president. Whether or not the Senate would go for that, because the Senate does have to confirm cabinet nominees and cabinet members. They have an advise and consent mandate by the Constitution to do that. I don't know if they'd go for that. I don't know if they'd let Stephen Miller be Deputy Chief of Staff at the White House, National Security Advisor, and Secretary of Department of Homeland Security. I don't know if they would let Marco Rubio be also DHS Secretary and Secretary of State, if you could fold those two together. Like, there's a lot of things that could or could not happen here. But it is just interesting that those things are being talked about in general right now. And it gives you a sense of the pace of this White House, but also gives you a sense of some of the chaos happening internally in the White House, which is not unlike the way that Trump's first term ended. It's just not how it started. And so for us to start in this place a quarter of the way through this term indicates a level of disorganization within the White House that only multiplies the further you get into any presidency when these things happen.
I'll channel my friend Scott Mitchell, who often says in these situations that perhaps at the start of the first Trump administration, the adults were in the room. And you talked about who would replace these folks. It does seem like President Trump has already chosen the most performatively positive, good on camera people he could find. Unless he's looking to put Erica Kirk in a cabinet position. She's been on Fox News 25 times this week, and she fits the
Sure does.
physical mold. Hold on, my camera just went nuts. Unless that happens, then I don't know who it's going to be. Jeff Probst, he hosts Survivor. Would he be willing to be and so my serious question to you though is, both for Kristi Noem and Pete Hegseth, who are in the middle of very serious domestic and foreign situations, how practical is it to replace those secretaries right now?
So we've seen Trump do this in the past, sort of a switch over from a peacetime consigliere to a wartime one kind of a thing. And like, that's not that uncommon in cabinet changes. The reason you pay attention to cabinet changes is because who those people are sort of signals a maybe potential shift in policy. RFK Jr. is also one of these people that may be on thin ice right now, partly because, like all these people, he's making headlines for the wrong reasons and the wrong kind of headlines. So he also might be on thin ice, but that's a different thing. In terms of switching over, in which we might be in the middle of heading towards a real hot conflict with Venezuela when it comes to increasing to 1 million deportations a year for DHS and continuing that, which you just can't do at this pace without having some real legal problems, which we've seen. It would be hard to get somebody who wasn't already in these departments to get up to speed quickly without there being hiccups and real bumps. And I'm going to keep talking about the speed at which this White House is moving because it's important because we haven't seen that in a long time. I mean, maybe since like FDR, if we're talking about the pace at which the White House is moving. And it's kind of like the reason that they do like jet engine car races in Death Valley or in Salt Flats is because they're flat and there's nothing there and there are no bumps, because if you hit a bump going 500 miles an hour, you're going to flip the whole car. And that is sort of a metaphor for this current administration. They are driving at 500 miles an hour across a salt flat and replacing somebody like Hegseth as we are about to invade Venezuela, which I don't have any knowledge that's going to happen, but right. Or, if we're going to ramp up deportation flights because now we have a fleet of 747s, and that's going to cause a bunch of legal problems for the Trump administration. Getting rid of Hegseth or Nome is a pebble in front of your tire on that salt flat, and to absolutely strain a metaphor to its very end. But but that's what this could be. And so maybe the president holds off for a little bit, but the more frustrated he gets, the more he's going to lash out. And he's a guy who, when things aren't going well, which they aren't for him right now, his approval rating is as low as it's ever been. It's as low as it was for Biden when inflation was at its highest. And that's not a comparison the president likes having made either. He's a dude who's going to pick people to fire. It makes him feel better to fire people. So it's how he made his TV money.
Right. I mean, think about the end of The Apprentice. The most exciting part of The Apprentice was the last 10 minutes when you were in the boardroom.
Right.
You're like, I'm sure he's going to fire Darryl Strawberry, and then he ends up firing Gene Simmons.
Right.
Or
right.
Ron Jeremy or something crazy.
Right. And it's a sense of control for him. And so when things feel out of control, this is the kind of thing that he does. We will see what happens with some of these things, because it could derail some things. It could mean more extreme people get into those positions. You could see Stephen Miller moved into the Department of Homeland Security position. Again, with the pushback we're getting from the Senate right now, there's a world in which Trump doesn't get the people he wants. I mean, just this morning, he was complaining about blue slips, which is a term of art for the fact that any senator can hold up any nomination for any reason. It's part of their mandate in the Constitution, the rules of the Senate. And blue slips are literally like a little piece of paper that says, I'm putting a hold on this nomination that gets delivered to the Senate clerk, I believe. And it's not really done on a blue piece of paper anymore, but it can be. They're still called blue slips. And we're seeing those happen all over the place. A lot of them from Chuck Grassley, the senior member of the Republican Party out of Iowa.
What's the senior in
He
senior?
sure does. He sure does. He was in his 90s.
Yeah.
He's one of these people with these blue slips and holding up these nominations, and Trump is really upset about that. And he wants to go on for other jobs and positions, but that's the first time we've seen in this term, at least, Republicans in either branch of Congress, other chamber of Congress, stand up to the president in this way. And when a president gets elected, there's a sense among the Senate that the president gets to pick the people he wants to be his cabinet. And maybe there's some policy disagreements, but the advise and consent role is really pared down in that first choice of a cabinet. Second time around, that's not going to happen. These senators know that there's an election on the line in 2026 in the midterms, and they also know that you've had your chance to set things in motion and set things in place. And now we're going to do some of our job. And we might be getting to that point. So again, if Trump fires Noam, Hegseth, Patel, Bondi, RFK Jr., it's going to be an uphill fight for a lot of the people left that Trump would pick, most likely.
And it's a risky move for President Trump because if you want to spend all of 2026 in hearings and fights in Congress that don't lead anywhere, it's going to be hard for President Trump to do his nationwide campaign for a lot of the folks running and say he's making progress.
Absolutely. He's not going to want to answer questions about these nomination fights while he's out on the campaign trail in Texas for a brand new district that just got created, or in Pennsylvania, or in Virginia, or whatever. He's not going to want to do that. And he might have to if he decides to do this. And it's political strain on a White House that is already strained by the personalities of that White House. It's a recipe for chaos within an administration that then, as all presidencies work, chaos within an administration tends to flow outward. And that could be the story of at least the beginning of 2026 if this thing happens.
Grant Hermes from the Make It Make Sense with Grant Hermes podcast. I want to ask you about what's going on with the newsletter, but I wanted to get your quick reaction on Jasmine Crockett running for Senate in Texas. I will tell you, be transparent. I love Jasmine Crockett. I like Tallarico too, but I love Jasmine Crockett. And you know, I'm like, I also know the state of Texas, and I'm like, I don't love her chances down there. However, what I would say is that it's sure going to be interesting.
It's going to be really interesting, partly because she is a frequent target of Donald Trump's, for lots of reasons, and a lot of them have to do with that fact that she's an outspoken Black woman, which the president tends to target when he's picking and choosing.
And if I may just cite something, I was showing my wife Jasmine's her campaign video, and the one where President Trump is just calling her low IQ,
Huh.
and my wife asked, "So what does he mean by that?" I said, "That is code.
Mhm.
It's a dog whistle for Black women.
Yep.
It's all it is."
Yep, it is. It absolutely is. And I mean, like, that was part and parcel to everything that Turning Point USA or Charlie Kirk had been saying too. So it was part of this narrative, and it's depending on who you are and how far to the right or how far into white supremacy you are, that means different things. It's a wink and a nod to eugenics in a way too. But Jasmine Crockett's chances in Texas, I think, are better than someone like Colin Allred, and I think they're better than Tallarico. She's just got more national pull, so money from outside of Texas is going to be flowing into her campaign. It's an interesting race because it's for John Cornyn's seat, and he is not well liked. He's not well liked by Republican voters. He's not well liked by Republicans in the Senate. In fact, Texas has two of the least liked senators in the Senate. It's Cornyn and Ted Cruz. And Jasmine Crockett, despite being very outspoken and very vocal about the way she feels about the president and the way she feels about policies, is a pretty deft politician. She was never really a part of the squad. Part of that is because she's a little younger than the squad members, but she saw that and didn't join that. She's always been a step removed. And when push comes to shove behind the scenes, she's a pretty pragmatic actor when it comes to how she operates and how she operates with people across the aisle. She might be brash on MSNBC or MS Now or whatever it's called, but she's not that way privately, and she's not that way with donors, and she's not that way with stakeholders, and she's good in front of a crowd. She is animating. People like her. She is a pretty good speaker when it comes to doing a rally, and she's good in a debate. And so,
Yeah.
and it's a real challenge to somebody like John Cornyn, who just hasn't had to do that in a long time. And it's not that Cornyn's not going to get surrounded by a bunch of people, because losing a Senate seat in that state in this cycle after the president has basically targeted Texas to be his experimental election ground for 2026, with re-gerrymandering the state potentially illegally in the middle of a 10-year cycle. To lose to a Democrat, to lose to Jasmine Crockett of all Democrats, would be a loss. Even if she loses and it's a close race, that's still a loss. it's going to be a really interesting race to watch. And I think one that Democrats are going to pour a lot of time and effort into, and money most likely into, because if they can flip a Senate seat in the state of Texas, they might be able to flip congressional seats in Texas. And then you get this like Democratic vision for the last 10 years of turning Texas purple. And it'll start with Jasmine Crockett. And she's maybe the most compelling Democratic candidate they've had since Colin Allred last time, maybe Beto O'Rourke, which is a name that, like, if you're a political watcher, like, it's not a great connotation. He's sort of a perennial candidate who's flamed out every time. But that's a race to watch. It's a really, really, really interesting one.
As somebody who likes Jasmine Crockett, that's very encouraging, actually. That's good to know.
Yeah, there's a chance that like she wins for losing and Democrats win for losing if she loses in 2026. There's a lot of campaign to go. There are many miles to go before we get there. Yeah.
Many miles to go.
Yeah.
And by the way, a great way for folks to keep up with that is to be following your Substack and your newsletter. They are different things. What do you have what's going on in the Grant Hermes world on Substack and in the newsletter?
Sure. So on Substack right now, I just dropped a brand new piece of reporting that you might have heard about this story that the Department of Education wants to deprofessionalize about 9 to 10 different degrees. They include things like teachers and nurses and social workers and engineers and architects. But a lot of them are mandatory reporters for child abuse and neglect. And I just wrote a whole piece for the Substack this week. It just dropped last night about organizations working to prevent child abuse and neglect and maltreatment are really worried about what's going to happen if people don't go into these fields because they can't get the student loans they used to get. That's what deprofessionalizing essentially means. And it will likely mean, according to these organizations, that we're going to have fewer people who are on the lookout for child welfare in the country. And I have not been able to get an answer out of the Department of Education about whether this was part of the plan or it was an unintended consequence. I would hope it's an unintended consequence, but right now it's impossible to know that because I cannot get an answer from them. So that's brand new there. I've also got the Things You Forgot from Civics class newsletter that comes out on the Substack as well. That drops every Monday. This week it was all about basically who makes war and who gets to declare that we are in a war, because it's supposed to be Congress, but it hasn't worked that way in a long time. And so that is all about all the civic stuff that we should have probably learned in school, but have forgotten because social studies was a long time ago. It's a lot of fun for me to write. I like that one a lot. But you can find those at mimsnewspod.substack.com. Just search MIMS, M-I-M-S, Newspod. It's all one word. That'll pretty much bring you to everything.
I'll tell you, I not only listen to your podcast and watch it and read the Substack to get briefed for this conversation, I read them and consume them to get briefed in general.
Yeah, thanks,
to
man.
make sure that I know what's going on. Because I've got my TV on, but I will tell you, I don't turn the sound up because I'm trying to think. So I'm only looking peripherally. If you want a little bit deeper, folks, make sure, and I'll have the link there always in the YouTube description and in the podcast to direct you to Grant. Grant Hermes from Make It Make Sense. Thank you so much. For those of you watching on YouTube, leave a comment, like and subscribe. Make sure that you see the @MIMS Newspod. That is the easiest way to get to Grant's work. And if you're listening on podcast, I don't even know that I have one review yet. I don't really know, but it helps to leave 5-star reviews, whether it's on Grant's work or on mine, because it helps with discovery in the podcast search engines. Until next week, we're recording this on Thursday. There's a possibility we might be doing this in person.
We might be. I'm in Oklahoma City next week, so we might actually be in the same room for this.
Well, I've got tabs on a fancy new studio, but if we have to just get over here at my house or something like that, we will figure this out.
I'll bring the donuts.
So
got it.
Donuts. You had me at donuts. Until next time, for Oklahoma Memo and Make It Make Sense with Grant Hermes, I'm Ryan. That's Grant. We'll talk to you next week.